How's it going, guys? Vaibhav here from GN Tech, and welcome to a camera comparison between the OnePlus 7 Pro and the Oppo Reno. I'm recording this with both of these phones' software on their latest versions, with the version number on screen for your reference, but this is coming from the front-facing cameras on both of these smartphones at 1080p resolution. Now with this you can judge not only the video but also the audio quality that's coming out of the microphones. But with that being said, I'm gonna get up and give you guys an overall idea of how both of these cameras manage to capture the video when moving around, as well as the camera's dynamic range. And you can also see that the Oppo Reno actually has a wider field of view compared to the OnePlus 7 Pro, and this is just something I'd like to point out. But with that being said, I'm now going to move into the primary camera specifications, followed by some photos and video samples from the primary cameras. So OnePlus has put a lot of emphasis on the 7 Pro's camera this time around, as well as that pop-up style front snapper. The Oppo Reno though has its fair share of innovation too, with the front snapper and of course the dual primary setup, all at a much lower price. So how much of a difference does that make? Starting with the flower sample, it's the Reno that has the more vibrant looking photo with the whites of the flowers. The greens and blues from the leaves and the sky are also equally saturated on both samples. Unlike the OnePlus, Oppo has a dedicated AI mode which makes very minute changes to color, but in combination with its color boost technology, the image is highly saturated, and while it is pleasing to the eye, the colors are inaccurate. Next up, we're testing dynamic range, and here both phones hold up well. The warmth of the Oppo Reno is appealing, but at the same time a lot of grain is also introduced into the sample on the foreground, something the OnePlus 7 Pro does not suffer from. The cooler tones on the 7 Pro doesn't quite have the same effect, but the quality of the photo is better. Here's another sample where the OnePlus has the edge with more detail in the foreground. Again, I like the warmth of the Oppo Reno, but the overall image quality from the OnePlus is better. Here you can also judge the 7 Pro's wide-angle lens, which does a pretty good job of retaining sharpness, whereas the Oppo Reno, you don't get a wide-angle lens at all. Moving to compare zoom capabilities, it's a bit interesting with this first image. The Oppo Reno has this sense of vibrancy that brings about more details in the trees and just makes the overall picture look better. With AI mode enabled on the Oppo, the change is almost unnoticeable. Zoomed in at 2 times, there's not a major difference between either phones. The level of sharpness and detail is about the same, and this is impressive for the Reno considering it does not have any optical zoom. But the lack of this does show at the maximum zoom level, where the OnePlus 7 Pro is able to keep a lot more detail intact compared to the Oppo Reno's sample. As far as portrait samples go, we'll start with the obvious difference in coverage. The OnePlus 7 Pro uses its telephoto lens, whereas the Reno uses its normal wide lens. And quite frankly, the Reno does a very good job with subject detection and blurring, whereas the OnePlus 7 Pro software is a bit haphazard, blurring out much of the subject when it shouldn't. When it comes to portraits of people, again, the Oppo Reno has the advantage with its wider field of view. It is impressive with its dynamic range and skin tone reproduction, and gives the 7 Pro some good competition. It's unfortunate though that there's no wider portrait support on the OnePlus 7 Pro at this stage in time, but it may come with a future software update. And to round up on the day shots, here's a selfie sample where the 7 Pro's colors are definitely better, but the sharper photo comes from the Oppo Reno. But where it all falls apart for the Reno is with its portrait mode, which struggles quite a bit compared to the OnePlus 7 Pros. Moving to nighttime samples, let's take a look at this one. At face value, neither phone has the best image here, but the photos are more than passable. With both phones having a night mode, it takes approximately 3 to 5 seconds for the image to process, and the results are quite impressive. There's a bit more sharpness to the Oppo Reno sample, especially in the foreground, but off to the right side, a bit more noise too, that the OnePlus 7 Pro does not suffer from. Next is this boat sample, which in all honesty was a very challenging photo for both phones. But once again, with night mode, you can just see how much more detail is brought back, even though here I feel like the result from the OnePlus 7 Pro is more impressive. The colors are more natural, and the sharpness in the overall photo just beats out the Reno. We've also got this photo sample, which to be honest does not look bad on either of the phones. The Reno is holding up well actually, and with night mode, again the samples produced are good. The warmer look of the Reno is more realistic to the scene, but that doesn't dismiss the OnePlus's effort, capturing a bit more detail in the overall scene. Here's a look at how both phones perform with their flash, where in terms of how they look, the Oppo Reno is superior, being able to light up the entire area as well as the subject. The colors are a hint more accurate on the 7 Pro, but the overall image is darker. And finally, these are selfie samples in the dark, where the obvious difference is the more natural photo from the 7 Pro. The Oppo also seems to have the background blown out, although its blurring is not too bad in portrait mode. The OnePlus 7 Pro is still visibly better in this case. With that, let's take a look at video from both the phones. At 1080p, the OnePlus 7 Pro has the better dynamic range and just a bit more stability. Now, despite the OnePlus 7 Pro having the wide-angle lens, you can't actually film video with it, so we'll just move to 4K samples next, where video stability takes a big hit on the Oppo Reno. The footage quality is around the same, but the 7 Pro crops in a fair bit when filming in 4K. When running, it is the OnePlus 7 Pro that has the more stable looking footage over the Oppo Reno. I thought I'd add that the 7 Pro even has a 4K 60fps option for smoother looking video, and that too is relatively more stable compared to just 4K 30fps on the Reno. At night, video quality suffers massively and both phones actually perform to a similar level. With 1080p footage, stability is about the same as well, just like during the day. 4K video quality looks about the same, if not a tad bit better for the Reno in some places, but the OnePlus has the advantage of better stabilization. So that's about it for this camera comparison. Let us know how you think the Oppo Reno did considering the big price difference, and tell us which samples you prefer. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching. This was Vaibhav and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.